Welcome everybody to the 7th and next to last webinar of the Just for All webinar series as part of our massive open online course on adult learning and education for the just transition. It's a great pleasure to still have all of you here, and we're very, very glad to have today with us also some wonderful speakers that will join us today. So, as per usual, we're going to start with a short introduction of the day, and that introduction for today will have to do with the very concept of strategic partnerships to promote the just transition. That is the topic of today's webinar. So I am going to start with the only PowerPoint presentation we will be having today. So don't be alarmed. We will then follow on with some very nice and vibrant conversation with our panelists. But just to set the scene, let's go and see what do we mean by strategic partnerships in the context of the just transition. Let me share my screen just briefly. Okay, lovely. So hopefully you can now see it. Yes, I see some nodding. So as I said, today we will be tackling the issue of strategic partnerships for the just transition. And we're doing that in the realm of the Just for All project. A bit of an insight on what is the Just for All project and what is the massive open online course of Just for All. It is a course that aims to provide a comprehensive understanding of just transition within the context of adult learning and education. And we're doing that through 8 different modules and 8 different webinars, covering all the various aspects of the just transition. Each module, in which we also have the webinars, is approximately 2 weeks long if you follow all the webinars, the lectures, the case studies, the resources, and the forum discussions. But it is a very flexibly formatted open online course, and you will have the opportunity to see it in a bit as well. We're also providing certification for anyone that completes individual modules in through the way of open badges, but if you complete the entire course, you can actually receive a full certificate. Then just a bit of a context, because this is one of 8 modules, as we said. We've already been through 6 in our webinar series. We've passed through the very first webinar on an introduction to lifelong learning and adult learning and education for the just transition, moving towards social innovation, as well as empowering and engaging vulnerable groups, grassroots initiatives and community learning, just transition and competencies for the future, awareness raising actions and campaigns for citizens and consumers 2 weeks ago, and then today, strategic partnerships for just transition. And of course, next week, our final module will cover gamification and other innovative methods to promote the just transition. So in this webinar and module, we will try to explore how to build and strengthen strategic partnerships to advance the just transition. We will learn about the conditions and the prospects of strategic partnerships, and we will try to offer you a bit of an actionable guidance through the discussions of our wonderful panel to solidify the alliances for the just transition. So first of all, why strategic partnerships? Why are we talking about a partnership, and why are we talking about a strategic partnerships? It has become evident that the climate crisis and also current trends of biodiversity loss, among many other environmental issues, are intertwined with a host of complex social issues. So this means that we have to fundamentally perceive the just transition as a bigger strategic goal within our organizations that, first of all, has a very big impact in our organizations and society at large, and to cultivate and to capitalize on this impact, we have to have a stronger voice in the processes. The second very important element on why we choose strategic partnerships is to share expertise, because we have identified that working with others can bring very diverse expertise to the table. For example, in the just transition, we're starting from the premise of understanding the just transition as a movement that began with the imperative of workers' rights around the 70s. In regards to climate change and climate science, but at this point we see it as something that also touches the adult education sphere, as we have seen in the previous webinars. So it's very important to understand how we're all working together, the workers, the learners, the educators, the adult learning organizations, and the policymakers that inform policies. The third very important element of strategic partnerships is not only the exchange of the expertise to achieve the aforementioned impact, but the way that we do that. And the way that we recommend and we bring forward is a way of collaboration and cooperation. So it's not enough to just say that we're in the same space, but to actually work together and to actually create spaces where we can talk about a community-driven transition, and all of us are part of this community. So in order to go into this strategic, let's say, element of these partnerships, it's important to start from a design mindset in how we structure these endeavors, what are our aims, and how do we aim to be taking decisions once we cooperate with these several fields of expertise. So once a partnership is created, we have, of course, to create an environment of collaboration, as already said, and to discuss these options with our partners, taking into account the local context, the specific legal requirements, if you want to establish an official partnership, the commitment, the objectives, who is committed, who is not committed, and at what extent. So one of the first decisions to take at that regard is whether to opt for a formal arrangement, maybe setting up a new legal entity, or have a funded project around a structure, or whether to maintain a more informal structure that does not create any legal obligations or entitlements. And on that, you should also think about the decision-making progress within the partnership. Are you moving forward only with a unanimous support or a simple majority? Do you vote on certain issues? Which ones? Is there a hierarchy in this partnership? Is it an assembly? So what is not only the scope of this partnership, but also the design behind it and the structure? So in setting up a partnership, what we are defining in this module is that you have to select who will be part of this partnership, who will be a member of this partnership, either legally instituted or unofficially. Can any organization apply? Do you have any criteria? How do you distribute responsibilities? How do we distribute responsibilities as part of the alliances and of the partnerships that we're part of? Today, we will see the example of the European Alliance for the Just Transition, for example, and delve a bit into how this initiative is organized to that extent. It is very important when discussing partnerships for an issue such as the just transition that has a very strong also information element and science element in it, an understanding element, as much as an advocacy and activist element. It's very important to see how much time and what is the format of the contribution and the shape of this partnership is. So it is important when discussing partnerships to understand that there are multiple ways to build these formats. Let's say we can have ad hoc collaboration, which is ideal for well-defined and time-sensitive issues. Let's say that the Green Deal is voted, and you really need to make some comments on it. It's very important that there is an opportunity for ad hoc collaboration. We can also have coalitions, bringing several and similar partners together to work on a specific campaign. We can have, as already mentioned, alliances focusing on one broader issue. But we can also have networks, meaning stable entities, which may adopt a formal structure or not, linking members working in a common area for a longer period of time. So all of this is all of these are things that you and we and the community of practice in adult learning and education is now called to take some choices upon, because as mentioned, the just transition is a concept that for many years was quite active in other realms of common life, such as work. But now we see the imperative to act on it in adult learning and education. So to do that, we have to start, let's say, now. So to do that, to start that, we have already established and maybe helped with it in this context by doing research on the topic. Hopefully, this is going to be a massive open online course that you can use for said research, map the organizations that are relevant to these issues. We will see later on that we have already done an initial mapping of good practices in the EU and outside. With the help of ICAE, where we have Majda here to introduce a bit their work as well for global alliances. We need to start engaging with each other. Hopefully, through these webinars, you have already met some people that you could think of as partners in the future, and of course, kick off your own partnerships and let us know if you did that. So if and when we start a partnership, of course, the most essential part of it is to run it, to actually start working together, to create solid communication channels, to grow these partnerships, and also to constantly evaluate how the partnership is going, what works, what doesn't. It's these structures and this idea that we have for strategic partnerships for a just transition is not to start something new for the sake of starting something new, but to understand what is the point of being member, of being part of an alliance, of being part of a coalition, of being part of a collaboration that can really move change forward. And talking about change forward, of course, we always have to think about the future. What is the strategy? What is the reason for doing everything that we are doing? How can we maintain these partnerships? How can we expand these partnerships? Or how to revise or even end these partnerships if we see that the reason for creating them has now been met or is no longer relevant for our members or ourselves. To deal with all of these ideas, I know it's just a very brief introduction that you can find, of course, answered if you follow our webinar, but you can also find in the chat in a bit. I'm going to add the links, examples of successful just transition initiatives and networks from the European, global, and local element. For the local element, we are discussing initiatives from Cyprus, Ireland, France, and Sweden. To lead the European practices, we have the EEA, the European Association for the Education of Adults, where I'm coming from. And of course, David, our moderator, is also coming from today. The global part of this analysis was done by our colleagues at the International Council for Adult Education, where Majda is coming from, that you will meet in a bit. And from the local, we have Cardet from Cyprus, Dantas from Ireland, La Ligue de l'Enseignement from France, and ABF from Sweden. So we have a very nice little library that you can explore in a bit to see some of the successful good practices, but most importantly, to get the full picture, resources, and continue building our community. We invite you to join our learning platform. You will see we have quite a lot of content in there for the 8 modules. We have some very nice mini games that you can play and see what you know or what you don't know about the just transition, but also follow all our webinars and specific insights, additional insights shared by our experts later on. And with that, I am going to slowly stop talking and just introduce you to our panel. Together with us, we have Andrea Casamenti. He's a policy coordinator for Just Transition at SOLIDAR and also leads the European Alliance for a Just Transition. He's mainly here as the leader of the European Alliance for a Just Transition, truth be told. We have Majda Richer, researcher at the International Council for Adult Education. And we have Carina Dantas, CEO of Sign to Europe. Of course, with that, I'm going to close the presentation, but I will also introduce briefly my wonderful colleague, Davide Muraro. He's our Policy and Projects Coordinator at the EAA, in charge of the majority of our advocacy and policy activities. And he will be moderating the session once I stop talking finally. So, Davide, you take the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Angeliki, for the introduction and for bringing us inside this very interesting topic that we will explore today. So we will start the panel presentations with some questions for our speakers, and very soon we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. So you can already use the chat function if you have any questions for the speakers while they are presenting their work. And we will have, in any case, after the initial round of questions from me, the opportunity for you to interact with the speakers and ask questions directly as well. So without further ado, let me start with Andrea. As Angeliki said, Andrea, you work at SOLIDAR as policy coordinator for the Just Transition, and importantly, you lead an impressive alliance, that is the European Alliance for the Just Transition, bringing together different stakeholders, as very different stakeholders from different sectors on this topic. So in your experience as a representative of the alliance, perhaps you can tell us a bit about the successful strategies that you have used in your organization, in the alliance, to bring together such diverse stakeholders to advocate for the a fair and inclusive transition, and also maybe what challenges do you see in keeping all these different groups aligned. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Davide. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation. I was about to say good to see you all. I don't really see everyone well, but still nice to be in contact also in this format. Indeed, David already introduced me, but I wanted to use a bit of time to tell you more about this European Alliance for a Just Transition, which, as David was saying, is a group of European stakeholders, organizations, bodies active at European level, that we at Solidar founded in 2021 and that we run, and that is still ongoing and growing, and hopefully also will continue to grow. So I won't take too much time, I promise, and Davide, feel free to also interrupt me if I'm speaking too much. But indeed, I think it's a concrete example of everything that Angeliki was also presenting earlier. Just to tell you, so indeed, in these organizations, we have very diverse organizations. We have organizations from which are more like social civil society organizations, NGOs more from the climate and environmental sectors. We have think tanks, as well as political groups, parties, and foundations. So why bringing all these diverse actors together? First of all, because of the topic. So as you've been seeing also in previous webinars, by definition, a just transition is something that brings different sectors together. And we all tend to work in our sector, not really communicating or looking at what others are doing. So we saw that at European level, when we decided to create this in 2021, we saw that there were organizations working on just transition elements, but they weren't really talking with each other, or they were sometimes even saying contradicting things. So while they had the same goal, they weren't necessarily always aligned. So we thought to create this alliance, first of all, to create a space for communication and for bringing organizations together and have them talk. But also, of course, because as Angeliki was presenting, unity is strength. So if we want to do something, if we want to achieve something when it comes to a just transition, it cannot just be SOLIDAR or even a bunch of social NGOs or a bunch of climate organizations working together. It really needs to bring as many stakeholders as possible. And that's where also this idea of developing a common vision, which is one of the objectives of this alliance, of making sure that we agree all together on what we want for a just transition, how to make it happen, and what kind of role the European Union, for example, should play. That's why, this is one of the objectives of this alliance. I was saying that it's also a particular alliance because we have political groups, parties, and foundations in the midst of the organizations, which are now almost 40. This is something that we decided to do to involve decision makers already in the alliance from the beginning. So not necessarily doing a usual NGO alliance that brings demands to decision makers, but to involve them in the coalition, really because we thought that the goal here wasn't necessarily to do a lot of advocacy or a lot of lobbying, a lot of statements, but more to have conversations, to foster alignment, and it was important then to have them on board. This makes the nature of the organization a little bit different than others, but of course, we've seen also very positive elements to this, such as, for example, the fact that the people from parties, European parties, bring insights that we don't necessarily have on processes or policies, but also the fact that they participate in discussions and they bring then the points that we raise, for example, from civil society, also to their internal discussions in the parties. What I also wanted to mention is that it's not just SOLIDAR, or the European Alliance for a Just Transition that has this particular model of bringing diverse organizations together. There's of course also other examples. There's the Right to Energy Coalition or SDG Watch Europe, the Fiscal Matters Coalition. So I'm not going to explain, what these organizations do, but I think with just a quick Googling, you will find some of these. So of course, it's not just something that we do in this alliance to bring, for example, climate and social organizations together, and of course also workers' representatives. I think I forgot to mention them before. There's others that do that, but of course everybody with a specific focus, for example, on the energy transition, or others more on more economic matters and the fiscal rules of the European Union, etc. As I was saying, we have this alliance has, various objectives, and of course, to be able to do anything together, whether it's a statement, a campaign, or even just, coming together for a discussion or a letter, for example, to ministers. there's a lot of work that needs to happen to make, these almost 450 actually organizations agree and develop a common vision. So that's where, also David and Angeliki were asking me, a bit to share some ideas about how we developed the group. So I came up with a few just points that I think would be useful in case you're thinking of building partnerships. That I think come from the reality of having created the coalition but also leading it. So the first one for me was that importance of having someone be the leader. As in every action, there's always the need of someone who kind of pushes everyone, provides a bit of a framework and energy, and also maybe budget to do that. And then, of course, everybody can jump on board, but you always need someone, taking on a leading role. It's also very important if you want to create, for example, a partnership for just transition, to show the value of your idea of what you're planning to do. Because, for example, at European level, but I'm sure at all the levels you operate in, everyone is extremely busy. So they will join in on the action if they say the value of what you're proposing to do. It's also important to make everyone's life easier. We're not here to make every organization, put a lot of hours or money into an idea, into an activity. It's more the contrary. If we do this, it's to make everybody's life easier. So we don't want to create extra work or frustration. We're actually doing things that help everyone in their work. And then it's also very important, of course, to make everyone's vision included. So, for example, for organizations such as IAEA, but also other education organizations, for example, in the Alliance, it was very important to have education as an element in the documents that the Alliance, for example, produces, which is why in a joint declaration we did in 2021, we mentioned the importance of recognizing the role of formal, informal, and non-formal education in the process of ensuring a just transition. We touch upon just transition in other parts or in other actions that we've done. And then another point, maybe the final one, is the importance of being ready to compromise. Because, of course, when you come in these big groups, it's always quite difficult then things don't always go, let's say, how you want them to go. A lot of it is, compromising. I want, for example, to say something, but somebody else might not agree. So it's very important also to listen a lot to what others say and do, and to try to find an agreement. I think I'll stop here, and maybe if there's time, I can also tell you more about some of the challenges we've had.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for the extremely interesting insights. I think you brought a lot of interesting points about leadership, about also the added value that a partnership should have for all the actors involved, the importance of compromising, and especially it is also crucial in a crucial element in the design also of such alliances. So how much are you willing to compromise and to work with different actors than your own? And a very successful example is indeed your alliance. So now we have explored a successful alliance at the European level. We can actually change a bit perspective with the international and global level. So I will invite now Majda to give us some insights in this regard. As you know, Majda works for ICAE, that is the International Council for Adult Education, which is a global network. So we expand a bit the geographical scope of our conversation with education NGOs working to promote learning and education for adults, for social justice, for healthy and sustainable and democratic societies. So work on many different fronts. So Majda, I will ask you, in your research at the International Council for Adult Education, which elements, which insights emerge when it comes to this global perspective on partnerships for education and social justice, and how can this inform partnership for the just transition? Majda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and thank you for inviting me to join. It's really a very big pleasure to be here. So I will focus on this research perspective, but just a bit to introduce the organization global perspective, because it really is crucial for this research perspective. So like David mentioned, it is ICAE is a global organization that comprises of umbrella organizations, national and regional NGOs in about 60 countries and in 7 different regions. So Africa, Asia, Caribbean, Arab region, Europe, Latin America, North America. And in general, the goal of ICAE is to cultivate this global network to support the linking between the members, but also to support the membership, to empower the membership to be present, to participate in the global policymaking arena. And with this, I just want to mention, because it is a topic of strategic partnerships, for ICAE it is very important to have this cooperation with the intergovernmental organizations, so to provide this space and empower the membership to participate in global policymaking. So ICAE has an associate relations with UNESCO and the consultative status in the United Nations Economic and Social Council. And this is a way to provide space for the membership to participate in global policymaking. One example is the Confintea conference, where different stakeholders gather to participate in influencing the global adult education policy agenda, or the high-level political forum, where the focus is on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and ICAE focuses on advocating for the role of adult education in the Sustainable Development Goals, so integrating adult education in different Sustainable Development Goals. And to finalize this part about ICAE's perspective in general, and to move on to research, the role of ICAE is to serve as this link between grassroots level and the international level, and to support the integration of international level policies in local and national, but also to empower the membership to have their presence, to have their not only their voice heard, but really to resonate on this global level and to make an impact. And when it comes to research, this diverse membership, this global perspective is really crucial, because many of aspects of ICAE's work are focused on research. So we have the executive committee members that have a strong background in research. We have some organizations from our membership that are also research focused. And when it comes to global partnerships in this research aspect, ICAE has participated in some of the global research initiatives, such as the Global Education Monitoring Report, focusing on literacy and numeracy, the aspect that ICAE worked on, or the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. Also, the research perspective from ICAE was provided on the topic of literacy. Some other research activities include the Convergence Journal, which was relaunched in 2022, and it also focuses on adult education from the global perspective. So this is one of the core activities of research, is one of the core activities of ICAE's work, both along with the policy and advocacy projects and capacity building activities. And now for some key insights that you mentioned. Maybe I will present like some key insights from the JUST4ALL project, and then some for the general strategic partnerships, if that is okay, and you interrupt me if there is no more time. So when it comes to JUST4ALL, we generally we could see that strategic partnerships were a success factor across all initiatives. It was mentioned throughout every and each one of them. It was important because strategic partnerships allowed for mitigating barriers to adult education when it comes to disadvantaged groups. So the cooperation with the state actors or other actors allow to satisfy some needs of the participants that allow them to come to participate in educational initiatives and also to continue being there. And not only this aspect of, okay, so stakeholder engagement was a success factor, but also some initiatives were specifically focused on how to support stakeholder engagement in just transition. So some of them were supporting partnerships within one institution, so how to collaborate within one institutions. Other were more interinstitutional, how different institutions and actors can cooperate in from these transdisciplinary perspectives. So this was very important when we look at the Just for All project practices in general. And when it comes to strategic partnerships and some best practices that we see when it comes to collaboration, what we have from experience in ICAE is the importance of gathering different stakeholders around one common goal or one common objective. So I mentioned Confitea. Confitea can serve as this global forum that invites diverse stakeholders, and it has, for ICAE, proven to be a very valuable opportunity to foster cooperation between different stakeholders, so civil societies, governments, and so on. Well-designed projects can also serve this role of initial gathering to unite different actors to collaborate. And then this is the first initial step to have some common goals, some common objective around which actors can gather. And then the second step is to create some long-term mechanisms for cooperation, so that it is not only left to this temporary initial event, but that there really is some to use some momentum, that initial event, to create some long-term partnerships. And again, if we use Confitea as an example, we have, for example, Confitea follow-ups, where civil society organizations gather to discuss what is happening in their countries, what are some good practices, or the Grale report, where after Confitea governments report on their progress, civil society can also cooperate to provide some insight, to provide some support on data gathering. So some general, I would say, best practice or insight is this to have this common goal, to have this common objective, initial event, to find something that gathers stakeholders together, and then to utilize it to promote some future long-term collaboration.
Thank you so much, Majda, for all these many insights that indeed are very relevant and complementary also to what we're discussing before. So great to see that also this expanded scope of our discussion. And perhaps now from the research point of view, from global research, we can pass to the practice. And therefore, I will invite Carina, that indeed has a lot of experience as a practitioner in international projects, in building multi-stakeholder engagement and social innovation, as CEO of Shine to Europe, but also many different other organizations and projects. So I will ask you indeed, Carina, from your perspective, well, you can tell us a little bit more about this project, but also how can partnerships between policymakers, between educators, community organization ensure that the learners' rights are become a priority in the context of the just transition. So perhaps building on your experience, you could tell us some examples of these collaborative initiatives that highlight this approach, that put learners first, for example, with the new EcoSmart projects.
Thank you so much for the question, and also for this very interesting panel so far. So I think it's actually quite bizarre at this point, but we are still struggling with putting people talking to each other. And when I say people. I'm referring to the stakeholders that you were mentioning in your question. After so many years talking about this, it is still not that easy that different stakeholders talk to each other on specific aspects. And every time we advance to new topics, it seems that we are always struggling with creating strong discussions, making messages clear from one to the others, understanding the value proposition of the different stakeholders, because this is essential to do anything. So what we are doing here today, and from Andrea and Majda, it was very interesting to understand these different perspectives. What we are doing here today, which is to discuss and to try to understand a bit more how we relate or not or complement each other's works, is really essential to implement anything. So I do think that everyone knows this, everyone discusses this, but then it seems like it's always starting from scratch to try to build again this collaboration, or at least this cohesive collaboration, where everyone understands what they can gain and what are the challenges, but they actually progress on something. So to go one step back, I would say our work at Shine resonates a lot with this. So we are more on translational research. So what we try to do is exactly to try to make the bridge between research, the policymakers, and the people in different areas, but always a bit around this citizen empowerment, inclusivity, and trying to progress around the SDGs, the Societal Development Goals. So one of the projects we currently have ongoing actually matches very well this discussion. It's the new EcoSmart. I also added the link in the chat. I hope it's visible. And what the project intends is mainly to understand how we can promote the green and digital transition in rural areas in specific countries. This very much connected to the habitat as an industry sector. So a lot of small businesses around artisan, the individual contractors, people that work on building houses or retrofitting or etc. But the small the small businessmen, let's say, or businesswomen. And I think it's quite easy to understand that in rural areas we have a lot of aging very small micro SMEs, which are still doing this type of work, but are really getting overwhelmed with all of the things that we put forward on the digital, especially, but also on understanding how their very, very small businesses could be greener and integrate circular economy and so many other valuable and guiding principles that could help them actually to be more competitive, but that at the same time would also improve their communities. So this is kind of a very vast area of work because we have all of the digital part, all of the green part, also the recovery, let's say, of small rural communities, which is another challenge. And then we are working mainly with people 45 plus. Of course, I feel a bit shocked because I'm almost 50 and now we talk about 45 plus like we are very old. I really don't feel that way, but at the same time, I do understand that if you had a very high education and you were kind of trained to be flexible, then the digital transition is not that hard. But if you had probably more manual works, or if you were less used to being more innovative or dynamic rural urban areas, then it is normal that you struggle with a number of things. And also because a lot of the information that we provide every day, and this comes from the governments to the municipalities to all of the public services and a lot of the private ones, is unintelligible for almost all of us. It's usually very complex, very bureaucratic. Things are very difficult to understand, and they always have this jargon. So we do this, for example, in research. When we are going through a specific topic, we use a lot of jargon, but we need to understand that if we want to talk to people in their normal lives, we need to break this down a little bit. So in New EcoSmart, we have 3 rural areas in countries which are in the southern of Europe with a lot of aging population, and we are trying to work around this habitat sector to promote the green and digital transition. And this is, let's say, a case study that I'm using to illustrate a number of things that I think are much broader than just for this project. But in this specific case, what we tried to do was to kind of attack it by layers. So the first layer would be to create an actual community in each of these rural areas. Even if you think that there is a community, which is true, much more usual than in cities, the truth is that is very often a community that is oriented to face pragmatic issues or to face their daily lives, but that still struggles, for example, to try to integrate innovation or to support changes that may be a bit more structural, because for every community it is difficult to change. When you have a cohesive community, this is even harder. So the good part, which is there is usually a community, is also a bad part, because then very often change is a bit more challenging. So the first idea was to try to create a group in each of these areas to whom we can speak, try to understand what they need, try to explain the basic concepts of what we are discussing with the green and digital transition, and also try to explain what could be the added value. This is usually the worst part, because you can only grasp attention of people if they understand this can be beneficial. And even if it is, of course, beneficial to say that, for example, a greener industry, of course, that favors the overall environment, favors us all. But as you can see from the political choices and elections we have been having lately, this doesn't resonate enough. So people need to see something tangible, something that will actually make sense for them. So we need to go to a very pragmatic level of explanation, saying how can you actually incorporate very specific practices, which ones can they be, and what will they represent for you to be either more competitive, to be able to raise more money, to be able to hire younger people, attract people to work with you in the future. So there's a lot of issues here that we can address. So we had very different areas of work on this. We have a long educational platform with a lot of more structured knowledge, but also using gamification and some a very simple app to respond to what people may need on their daily lives if they want to know more about a specific topic. And then once you have these communities, then, okay, it's very nice, but the whole idea was that there was progress. So what we did was to create a transnational layer. So we have people from these 3 rural areas discussing with each other, which of course raises a number of other issues like language and cultural aspects, etc. So what we have is kind of a few representatives that can communicate with each other. Well, it's not that difficult because it's Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian, but we also have a lot of English around this because the consortium is multilingual as well. So we have some people that can kind of come as the ambassadors that will be able to go to the transnational level, learn a bit more, and then go back to the community level and see what could be adapted, what can they use, and what are the differences and similarities between the regions. And then we have an additional layer, as I was saying, it's kind of a bright cake. You just put layers on it. So the last layer was more around the impact or the communication that this can have with international expert layers. So how can we then also go to the big state of the art and bring things down that can be of interest, but how can we leverage what we are learning from this very pragmatic world that can be taken up and also come as usually small but hopefully operational advice for those that are implementing policies for the twin transition and that can understand how to bring this forward in a way that will at the end impact on the small communities, which is what we want, because otherwise it's always on the policy higher level. So this communication between the different levels of intervention is probably one of the key aspects of the project. And I do think at the end that what I took maybe 10 or 15 minutes to discuss something that can be very simple, which is everyone needs to communicate with each other. Be able to understand each other so that we can work together on the problems of each level of engagement. And overall, well, the project, in this case, New EcoSmart, will end after the summer, so we can let you know then if things were progressing or not. But I think a lot of what was said resonates very well with what was presented for Just for All and from the discussions of Andrea and Majda.
Thank you so much, Carina, for all these interesting insights, especially on working on key connections. I think it's one of the keywords that I really we can take home from your message, and the connection between different levels, but also between different actors. So I think it was a very inspiring project as well. And with this, I would like to open our Q&A. And first of all, inviting our audience to ask any relevant questions regarding what our speakers presented. So you can ask questions using the chat function. So you can just type in your question and specify if the question is directed towards a specific speaker or for it's a more generic question. You can also raise your hand with the function in the Zoom call and ask your question directly. So you can take your time to do that. Let's see if we have any questions. Otherwise, perhaps I will break the ice with our first questions for our speakers. In the meantime, oh, we do have a questions from Anastasia. So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for the great input. Thank you so much for the feedback, Anastasia. Although it is very holistic, my only question is, given the current political landscape, the global political landscape, how do you think it will affect the evolution of strategic partnership for the just transition? I think it's a very relevant and topical question, as we're talking about a lot of nice things, but the world around us is going perhaps in a different direction, or at least part of it is. So indeed, we cannot think of ourselves in a silo, so in a vacuum, but how can we adapt our strategies to build partnerships in such a context? Is anyone that would like to start from the speakers from our panel? I see Carina, please.
I would be happy to say something a little quick. You are right, and this is, let's say, a bit of a depressing point for everyone, I think, because indeed, when we think that a lot of things are granted in our world and won't go back, then suddenly geopolitical change impacts. This is a bit historical cycle, still depressing, of course. But I do think that the only thing I can say to that is that we should be very clear as Europe, I would say, as countries, but as Europe as well, to stay strong on our main values, on our guiding principles, on an ethical attitude, and don't open hand of this, even in face of big economic gains that we know never actually comes. So it is important that, for example, the group that is here keeps this in mind, that we all discuss this, that we still struggle for a more just transition, and that we keep pushing for it because it's what we can do, I think. But we shouldn't lose hope on that and still pressure as much as possible on all levels to keep the agenda going.
Thank you so much, Carina. And I saw that Majda wanted to react as well, please.
Yes, I can add that in general, when looking from experience, the partnerships differ depending on whether there is more or less democracy in countries, so the mechanisms will differ. But what we can do is look from some good practices from that have worked in the past that can be relevant in different contexts. So whether it is again, like organizing around some common goals that Carina mentioned, standing by some values that really do gather people together, or looking how to balance different partnerships that may have different interests, but to see what is some common ground that really can be some unifying factor that works in even when the context changes.
And perhaps, Andrea, before giving you the floor, let me make the question a little bit more difficult, as at the European level, especially, it's not only the political landscape, the political landscape that is prioritizing other topics, but is also that is what we are facing is also questioning also the role of NGOs, attacks on civic space that is shrinking for many reasons, questioning also the funding that, for example, is needed to also build such alliances or to work on these topics. So also from your perspective as a leader of an alliance in the Brussels space at the European level, how do you see also these challenges? What future do you see for strategic partnership in this context?
Yeah, thank you, but also not thank you, Davide, for making the question even harder. I mean, it's indeed a very difficult question, but thank you, Anastasia, for raising the point. I think at European level, indeed, as Davide was saying, there's a lot of I mean, things that have changed in just a matter of months, new priorities, institutions, EU institutions that have gone more to the right side of the political spectrum. So that, of course, has also made us realize how easier, let's say, we had it until even just a few months ago, when priorities were more aligned, I would say, with what progressive organizations, for example, like SOLIDAR, advocate for and work on. With the European Alliance for a Just Transition, of course, the first thing we did in this new context is think about the question, what do we do now, and are we even, needed now? And the answer, which seems straightforward, but it's not necessarily, because, of course, when priorities change, everybody also tries to jump on the wagon of the new priorities, or tries to adjust as much as possible to the new context. We decided that we were even more needed than before, that we needed to work even more closely with each other. And for example, the first thing we did was publish a document that doesn't at all make reference to what's happening, but it actually says this is what we want, independently of what you have set, you meaning European Commission and other institutions, have set for your work as priorities, as things that you're doing. This, of course, is all strategy. It might also not lead to anything, but we felt that it was more aligned with what we believe in, and Carina was mentioning values, than just changing the nature of our alliance just because the wind is blowing in a different direction. So of course, but as you were saying, David, I mean, things are getting more and more challenging for civil society organizations in particular. So, of course, this also has an impact on what we can do, what we can achieve, the amount of energy and resources that one can put into, also the collaborations. But at least there's a big commitment from the organizations in this alliance to continue and move forward, which I think would have also gone differently. So that's already a good thing that I hope also other alliances on similar topics, on just transition and other topics related to sustainability, will also do.
Thank you so much. So indeed, it was a difficult question, but you provided an excellent answer, I think, and a lot of food for thought. So I got an A grade for this. So let me ask our audience. I see we have a question from our colleague, Angeliki, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, of course, if someone from the audience wants to ask a question, please feel free to do that. But I kept on thinking, like listening to the discussions and building from the initial answer from Andrea to Majda's to Carina's. I'm thinking of how can we bridge this, let's say, this need for the tangible, pragmatic level of creating strategic partnerships, especially if we're talking about partnerships between different sectors and different areas, where the pragmatic level is very different for a policymaker and a learner. It's a different concept. For a policymaker, pragmatic seems to create a policy statement, but for a learner, pragmatic means to see an actual like change and difference in the locality. So what I'm wondering first, because Carina gave us an idea of the local element, but I would like to ask first Andrea and then Majda, how do you see that on like creating alliances in a pragmatic level with associations, which is quite, it's a bit more high level, let's say, meaning that they have members, they are mostly parties or associations, things like that. And then for Majda, how is it working with so many different countries around the globe on that pragmatic level? So, Andrea, if you may.
Trying to unmute. So if I understand correctly, Angelique, you were mentioning more like concretely how that can be done.
Yes.
I mean, that's it's also a very big question. Of course, there's not a one format to do things. Of course, for many of our organizations working at European level, as you mentioned, are membership-based organizations, so associations within themselves, then member organizations operating at other levels, and that, of course, builds the whole also information flow from the top to the organizations down and the people down to the local level and the other way around. Extremely complicated. I think it's quite important that everybody operates at their level, let's say, but that there's of course also this communication so among the different organizations, but also among the different levels. So, for example, it would be impossible at European level to be able to bring everyone from every city all over Europe together, but it's very important. And anyway, what many of our organizations do is bring the vision of everyone, of those that they represent up to the European level. So by even coming together, let's say 30, 40 people, I think that's already that's a good way of making sure that everyone is represented. And then of course there's a lot of practical things. I think meeting in person is extremely important. Of course we're now used to a lot of Zoom, but a lot of these partnerships and alliances are built on relations of people also getting to know each other. So of course you cannot do this with everyone. Then it's very important, for example, that you're in the same city. You cannot do that with someone on the other side of Europe, for example. And there's a lot of other things like making sure that there's constant communication. I don't think that an email every 6 months can do much for a partnership or for an alliance to move forward. To also the fact that, as I was saying earlier, there's a lot of personal touch that needs to go into these alliances. It cannot also just be an automatic thing. There's a lot that needs to be building on personal relations and contacts and connections.
Majda, would you like to?
Yeah. So if I understood correctly, how the cooperation can be practical for different levels of so in general, when it comes to governments that are more on the macro level and the civil society more on the working more with the community needs. In general, governments, they want to present themselves in a good light. They want to show that they are working towards global agendas, that they are fulfilling the whether European or global policies. And it can be fruitful for civil society to showcase how something that civil society is advocating for aligns with these global agendas, and therefore will present the government in a good way as working towards these goals. Like we had one example from Serbia is that we had the functional elementary adult education of adult Roma, which was introduced during the decade of Roma, which was important on the European level. The government is a candidate for the European Union, so this was used as a momentum by the civil society, by the professional communities to introduce changes on the national level, because it was something that aligned with the goals of the government at that point. Also, there is the possibility to utilize some collaboration on, for example, literacy monitoring through, for example, UIL's Global Alliance for Literacy, because in many countries, literacy is a very burning issue and priority. And this collection of data, analysis, research on the same database and the same goal of research and collection of data can be something that is a common ground at that moment, and then again maybe utilized later for some practical changes and not exclusively for research purposes. And for some other maybe practical suggestions, well, I mentioned before that there is this initial event, but what we have found to be important is that we do when we look at this gathering of around the common goals, it should be something that is more concrete and not so abstract and concrete enough, and like what you mentioned, tangible. So example is one of these collection of data, monitoring, and so on. But when something is around concrete problems, it is something that makes the partnership more strong, more sustainable, something that can remain priority in the future as well. And also related to the point about government, their image, and so on. Promoting results of partnerships is generally something that can be a strong motivating factor. So, for example, when some partnerships work well, showcasing that it is happening can be something that initiates further partnerships between other organizations, between other actors. Also for those partners to as a motivating factor to stay in the partnership, so encouraging them to maintain it and to not become this one-time effort on single event. So maybe those several practical strategies.
Thank you, Majda, and thank you, Andrea. I think it's very useful to see the approach in both cases, and I'm keeping maintaining the connections from what Andrea said, and I think that grasping momentum in terms of narrative from what Majda said. So thank you. I don't know, Carina, if you would like to make a comment. I wouldn't want to exclude you from the question.
No, of course. I think I already talked a lot about this. Maybe just an addition, a short addition for what Andrea mentioned about funding, is that we always see a lot of interest on very big funding, so big flagships, millions of euros. And sometimes for this small changes in the local level, the pragmatic actions, we would just need very small budgets, but that gave a reason for people to move. And I think this worked better in the past. For example, I remember that the partnerships pre-COVID that we had in the commission, I was in the IPNAHA, we had 2 meetings a year. We had the possibility of getting paid travel. The working groups had support from people being paid to do this. This wasn't a lot of money, but it was really well spent. And now I think we miss this for fostering this strong partnerships. They need a little bit of support. They don't need a huge budget, but they need some. And this, for some reason, is not attractive anymore, or it's not sexy enough to be investing, and it's really a need. So I do hope that this will change eventually again.
Thank you
Lovely,
so
thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, also Carina, for contributions. So, is there any other question from the audience? I don't see any hands raised. You can always type in some questions in the chat or raise your hand, also from our colleagues. I see Hilmi. Yes, please.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for this wonderful conversations. And now, since we're talking about strategic partnership, I was wondering, now that we have more shift towards in EU level, more shift towards the right and the majority of the right, and when it comes to strategic partnership, how should we position ourselves in terms of establishing these strategic partnerships with right-wing or extreme right-wing political groups or policymakers, and whether should we establish this strategic partnership with them or identify like-minded policymakers to include in our strategic partnership. And I was wondering how should we stand when it comes to this strategic partnership, considering the current EU level political landscape. Thank
So
you.
perhaps, Andrea, you want to start with this?
Sure, thank you, Hilmi. In the European Alliance for a Just Transition, we have kind of talked about it, but also not so much. What I can tell you is that when we first created it in 2021, and when we decided to involve in it also political parties and groups and foundations, as I was sharing earlier, that they're members, they're also part of this coalition, of this alliance. We actually invited also political forces that weren't necessarily the ones that we normally work with, let's say. So also more from the right wing. Of course, not going towards the far right, but for those of you who know, for example, the political groups in the European Parliament, we reached out to the Liberals and to the EPP, so the European People's Party, so more to the right. But they never replied to us, despite several, attempts of contact. And that's why, and on the other hand, when we contacted, just like we did for the others, when we contacted the more progressive forces, they straight away showed interest in this coalition, in working with civil society, in the topic of a just green transition. So, of course, this is how then we ended up in the alliance having more progressive forces in the coalition. But there was a willingness, of course, also to welcome others. Now in this new context, as we were also saying earlier, there is of course going to be attempts to contact those who are now in power, who are maybe more from not, let's say, our political family. But I don't think there's necessarily going to be a big change of strategy in terms of that we're going to try to make them our best buddies, and that we're going to change the way we look at things, or the way we talk about things, to really make sure that they like us. So, for example, this document that I was mentioning earlier that we published at the beginning of the year, we did send out also to members, so to commissioners, so members of the College of Commissioners of the European Commission, that are, for example, from right-wing governments, but because we thought that it's interesting also for them to see our view, but voila, this is, we will contact them if they're interested. We're happy to have a conversation. But of course, this doesn't mean that we are changing who we are just to please them.
And perhaps I see Angelique, you wanted to intervene before?
Just a very small comment, because this is something that we're also touching in the webinars, and that's an excellent comment by Hilmi, because of course we always say that we shouldn't stick to the people that we always know and we know that agree with us. So what happens with the people that we know that do not agree with us. So there is definitely work to do there to inform and to push and to, communicate the claims of the like-minded people, but at all times we have to be sure that we do not facilitate tokenism or greenwashing from their part as well, by saying that they're part of an alliance, for example, they're okay, checkpoint, we're in favor of greening the planet, thing is done, and then we don't do anything policy-wise. So we have that included quite a lot on the second, I believe, module of the MOOC on social innovation and the just transition, and how, like, in innovation we see a lot of like this co-opted language that we need to keep avoiding, but definitely while pushing towards their part as well, that they listen about it, definitely. But we always have to be aware of what we are facilitating as well. That's just a small comment.
Majda, please.
Yes, I can also add that I wouldn't say that to completely disregard the partnerships. I think it depends on the partnership type and the situation. So for some events or some projects, it might be good to try and find some common ground, to try and find some goal that is unifying for both actors. But at some other situations, it might be better to play the opposing role or the more subversive one, because it will depend on the concrete event, whether it can be something that unifies or whether it will turn out, as Angeliki mentioned, in some kind of tokenism or something that just serves the purpose that is not aligned with the goals of the civil society, but just to give legitimacy to something that is not really aligned with the values. But I would not disregard it completely because of the infrastructure, the funding, the cooperation that can be fruitful. So maybe try to find some strategy on which partnership type, when it can be beneficial and when it should be the opposite, playing the opposing or subversive role.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one last question. So I don't see any question from the audience yet, but if there is no, I will ask a question myself. As we talk about political diversity, so how do we welcome and accommodate, to what extent we want to interact as we go from the other sides of the political spectrum with different political opinions. Perhaps we can reflect also on how we can build diverse alliances, meaning that how can we also ensure that people that are typically underrepresented or non-represented in conversations about the just transitions are indeed have a seat at the table and can meaningfully contribute to these topics. So Andrea, as I asked a difficult question before, I think that would be quite, it's still a difficult question, but I think for you it would be quite easy, as you have as a SOLIDAR a lot of experience in this. So perhaps I'll let you start before giving the first to the others.
Yeah, I mean, on this, there's of course a lot that could be said. I think it's also really the role of civil society organizations like SOLIDAR, but like many civil society organizations, to indeed really be the voice then of those that don't necessarily, have the possibility for various reasons to have a seat at the table. And of course, these are very often those who are in precarious situations, those living in poverty, those who are marginalized. So, of course, here's the role of civil society organizations is fundamental, and there's lots of examples of how consulting and of course not just consulting but having civil society play a big role in the development of policies, of measures, can really make sure that the rights and the needs of people who are marginalized then can be taken into account and are taken into account thanks to civil society organizations. But of course, there's also a lot of innovative forms also of participation of people in decision making. I think the green transition is also an area where a lot of things have been tested, like climate assemblies. The Just Transition, for example, itself is an interesting example because there are in some countries, especially in Ireland, but also in Scotland and in Wales, in the UK, the government set up Just Transition commissions, so groups of experts that are supposed also to bring then the different perspectives, as we were saying, also social, climate, etc., all together, and also provide advice then to the government. So there's a lot of examples with direct participation of people, but of course also through the representativity and the fact that civil society organizations can represent them.
Thank you so much. Perhaps let me ask if Majda, Carina, you have a 1 minute comment in this. Majda?
I can refer a bit to the best practices that we collected, as they showed how some participation can be encouraged, and just in 2 sentences, creating some mechanisms, networks where different groups and community level can be engaged. And also something that was relevant across practices was capacity building to how to empower citizens, how to empower communities to express their opinion, participate in advocacy. So these different educational initiatives that really support participation.
Thank you so much. Carina, last but not least.
Thank you, Al. I think Majda and Andrea already said a lot of relevant things. Just maybe to say that in some cases, even if I don't love the mechanism, I would consider that we had some top-down requirements for participation. So in some groups, we should have the requirement that people from this or this type of groups or characteristics or etc. would need to be involved for the discussion. This, as I say, is kind of the mechanism itself is a bit discriminatory. It's true, but it's the same as in many other settings. For example, like having more women in parliament or etc. This actually works because it forces people to be there and helps to promote the culture where people then need to learn enough to be there. They past want it. So it's kind of a midterm thing, but we should have more requests from the commission, from the governments, from etc., to have the involvement of people who are usually less involved, to be sure that everyone actually learns to have a voice as well.
Indeed, and I think we raised in such a short time a lot of extremely interesting points, but also challenges, I think, for all of us. And I hope also for our audience to work on. And with this, before concluding the webinar, I would like to thank all the speakers and give the floor to Angeliki for some closing remarks. But I thanks once again all the speakers for the extremely interesting work, first of all, and then for their contributions to the event today. Thank you so much. Angeliki, please, the floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, as well. It's always a pleasure having these webinars. And with that, I will say that next week on the 25th in the morning, 10 to 11:30 CET, we're having the last webinar of the series on gamification and innovative learning methods to promote the just transition, where we will be hearing from some very interesting initiatives for active citizenship through gaming, impactful games, but also generally how to understand the world around us through approaches that we might not have thought of. So we really invite everybody to join us there. I will let you know that, as always, in 1 week's time, we will launch the recording of this session alongside the additional material that our wonderful experts will provide us, and you will be able to find everything on our learning platform, in which I believe you're already members as you have registered to be here. So thank you, everybody, once again, and see you next week, hopefully.
Goodbye. Have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.